Hi, welcome to the Space Policy Show. I'm Colleen Stover from the Aerospace Corporation. Today we've got episode 94, Assessing Commercial Solutions for Government Space. We've got three great guests lined up. First, we've got Ron Birk from the Development Director of the Aerospace Corporation, the Associate Principal Director there. Welcome back, Ron.
Thank you, Colleen. Good to be here.
Great. We've also got Clare Grason from the Commercial Satellite Communications Office at the United States Space Force. Hi, Clare.
Hi, great to be here as well.
And finally, we've got Phil McAlister, the Director of the Commercial Spaceflight Division at NASA headquarters. Thanks for being here, Phil.
My pleasure.
So before we get started, I just wanted to point out a publication that the Center for Space Policy and Strategy published in February, Assessing Commercial Solutions for Government Space Missions. And I wanted to start with you, Ron. Why did you and Dave McQuiggan write this paper, and why now?
Thank you, Colleen. Really appreciate that question. So, with the release of the National Space Policy in 2020, we recognized a significant emphasis on commercial in the space policy, including guidance for all government agencies to use commercial to the maximum extent feasible under law, if my memory serves, to quote it. And they referenced commercial 89 times in the policy, so it's almost like they were trying to send a message. So that combined with the significant increase in both the overall market, we've seen the market continue to grow to about 380 billion in 2021 timeframe, and the increased investments from the private sector and commercial capabilities. Tracking on the order of 17 billion invested in 2021 in new capabilities, approaching the level that the government is investing in new capabilities. So with all of that emphasis on commercial, what we didn't see was guidance that would be beneficial to the community in terms of how to think about assessing the appropriateness and the readiness of particular commercial solutions for particular government needs. So we formulated the Commercial Readiness Assessment Framework, and to include in the paper, as well as a recognition that it matters where a product is in the market space. There's a distinction between the commercial acquisition approach that would be taken for, say, developing a bespoke system like the James Webb Space Telescope, so thankful it's doing so well, and all the way to pure commercial communication services, such as Claire and Phil are both addressing. And then there are points in between where the government and commercial can partner to take an emerging market area solution and tailor it for the government, and also make it more ready for the private sector. So we just thought that it was a good time to provide those kinds of frameworks. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would say, message received, right? We're seeing, commercial integration and development from, launching our astronauts into space and providing, situational awareness on the ground from space. It seems to be everywhere. So I know, NASA has leaned in quite heavily to commercial development historically. So Phil, when did this kind of start, or was there a kind of turning point for NASA that started happening more?
Yeah, in my mind, it started around 2005. Prior to that, we had some partnerships at NASA and some commercial activities, but most of them had been not fully successful. And in my opinion, the reason why is because we tried to go too far. We tried to put too much of the responsibility on the private sector in those early days, without really fully understanding or appreciating the market factors, the technology readiness factors, and just the overall business factors. We just really didn't have a clue back then. But starting in 2005, we started the Commercial Cargo Program, which was definitely a public-private partnership with industry to develop cargo transportation carrier capabilities to the International Space Station. At that time, we knew the space shuttle was going to be phased out, and that was our main logistics and cargo resupply transportation vehicle. So we knew we had a shortfall, and at that time, then Administrator Mike Griffin thought that it might be possible to develop a more commercially oriented approach. He said it was a gamble at that time. And it was because it was a risk in that we didn't really have a lot of experience with that paradigm and that kind of model, but we tried it out. It was very successful. And then we kind of doubled down on that approach with the Commercial Crew Program in 2010 to develop human space transportation capabilities to low Earth orbit, commercial human space transportation capabilities. That has been very successful. And so now we are seeing that kind of approach being adopted, or elements of that approach being adopted in other places at NASA.
Yeah, no, that's great. So a little bit of background there. So, in terms of defense space, however, there, for a lot of people, it seems that commercial integration into defense missions seems, relatively new as compared to, NASA's long history. So, Claire, do you think commercial for defense space is here to stay? And if so, why?
I absolutely think it's here to stay, and I think it's bound to grow. Our office, the Commercial Satellite Communications Office, or Cisco for short, has existed for about 25 years, initially under the Defense Information Systems Agency, DISA, before the FY18 NDAA transitioned us to what's now the Space Force. So we are now positioned under Space Systems Command, under their newly formed Commercial Services Office. So I think that in of itself is signaling that the Space Force is laying the foundation to grow and prioritize commercial relationships, which I think is very positive. Commercial industry is leading in many areas, is unhampered by some of the bureaucratic processes that the government is subjected to. And we're seeing that within satellite communications arena. Within our office, a lot of our acquisitions peaked around 2012, right? The height of activity in the CENTCOM AOR. But it's now crawling back up.
CENTCOM AOR? Sorry.
I'm sorry?
CENTCOM AOR?
Yeah, the CENTCOM AOR, due to the wars that were taking place in Afghanistan and Iraq at the time, there was a heavy reliance on commercial SATCOM. So after about 2012, we did see a slight decline. But once again, we're seeing our business and numbers rising. And I think that's a reflection of the military writ large moving in the direction of considering commercial, and in many cases, considering commercial first. And our office is certainly there by law to support them, but also as the marketplace, the office of choice to get them connected to a wide array of capabilities. So I certainly think that commercial's here to stay. And quite frankly, we're looking forward to laying a much wider foundation within the Space Force and working closely with partners such as NASA and others to ensure there isn't duplication and that we're leveraging the collective buying power that the government has.
Yeah, absolutely, Claire. Your office being that kind of, belly button, and people think of commercial spaces as being more innovative because they don't have all the red tape, but you're still providing that belly button. So it's a nice little overview, a little background of what we're talking about. I'm going to pass it over to Ron. He's going to dive much deeper into some of these questions, and take it away, Ron.
All right, thanks, Colleen. So we'll look forward to exploring some of these areas a little further. So appreciating that we're all operating together to achieve a national goal to advance U.S. space capabilities in the national interest, and we're recognizing that the commercial sector is coming on strong in terms of building capabilities and offering them for applications that are beneficial to government missions. Claire, appreciating the good work that your office does and the focus that you've had on proliferated LEO, what are some of the current and future plans that you and your office have to extolling the virtues, if you will, of commercial capabilities for the Space Force?
Sure, great question. So as I mentioned earlier, we are positioned within the new Commercial Services Office within Space Systems Command, and that's led by Jeremy Leader, who's recently named to the role. So, but within the Commercial Services Office, two things that we're really focused on. We have two business units today. One is the Enhanced Mobile Satellite Services Program, which effectively captures our relationship with Iridium satellite. It's an enterprise program whereby we're aggregating demand for that capability across the DoD, federal, and even international partners. So we're able to aggregate collective demand, buying power to enter into centralized contracts and manage the capability as a service across a very diverse customer base. That's been enabled by the Working Capital Fund, which has been a key element of the success of the program. So instead of having multiple customers having individual contracts with Iridium and the supplier network that we have in place to enable that end-to-end capability, it's done holistically. Our other business unit is set up a little differently today. Customers individually fund their acquisitions for commercial SATCOM capabilities, and therefore we have about 175 different contracts in place right now to satisfy their needs, whether it be C2, logistics, Blue Force tracking, broadcast requirements, etc. We believe that approach is a bit suboptimal. So one of our objectives is to move toward an enterprise approach to managing commercial SATCOM, similar to the Enhanced Mobile Satellite Services Program that I just described. There's substantially more complexity involved, given we have relationships with a plethora of commercial SATCOM network owner operators and third-party integrators. But we have started a transformative acquisition strategy to achieve a model whereby we have fewer contracts that represent the needs of a larger population and therefore hopefully can gain some efficiencies. Secondly, we are building out an automated capability to manage commercial SATCOM. Similar to the acquisition process, we rely on a lot of manual processes that are not always inefficient for getting a holistic situational awareness picture of the DoD's commercial SATCOM acquisition and utilization. So we have entered into a contract with Deloitte for a system that's predicated on a Salesforce platform, and we look forward to integrating that resultant product into additional systems that therefore can provide better information and promote better decision-making and responsiveness to the joint force across their operational needs. Together, these two objectives that I've just described are designed to take advantage of the latest technology. Ron, you mentioned proliferated LEO. We are preparing to go out with an acquisition for those capabilities, which will incorporate into these different models that I've just described. So they are being set up to take advantage of the commercial marketplace as it exists today and as it's planning to evolve as well.
All right, Claire, thank you. It's great to hear of those plans and appreciate the value of the streamlining processes that you described, as well as the ability to be able to network, I guess pun intended, from a comms perspective, all of the different companies together into a total ecosystem approach, an enterprise approach that can satisfy a wide array of needs. Really appreciate that. Phil, over to you, and appreciating the robust history that you and the NASA program have in successfully delivering commercial capabilities, launch capabilities. What are plans that NASA has going into the future to continue to expand that type of service for the exploration mission?
Yeah, so before I go into that, I think it's important for us to sort of have a common definition of terms. I'm sure your audience is pretty smart on these sorts of things, but in my opinion, when we talk about commercial acquisitions or the commercial sector, or even commercial companies versus non-commercial or traditional companies, there's been a lot of confusion, I think, in the industry about what those things mean. And when you look historically at our industry, the space industry, it has been and still is dominated by large aerospace and defense companies. Those companies are set up to provide services to the government. The federal government is their main customer. They don't invest a lot of their own money in new capabilities. They might use some what's called IRAD funds, which are innovative or independent research and development funds, but it's relatively small. And those investments are geared toward making them more competitive for government contracts. That's a very good business. I worked in a company like that for 10 years and loved it. But that's different than what I would call the commercial space industry or the new space industry. These are companies that do not necessarily focus on the federal government as their primary customer. They're willing to invest large sums of money in terms of getting their own capability that they will own and operate, as opposed to the government having the ownership of that intellectual property. And they are looking for business opportunities. So in my opinion, the big distinction is the business model. Obviously, the large aerospace companies, they're commercial companies, they're incorporated wherever they are incorporated, but the business models are different. One's not better than the other, but they are different, and they are more appropriate for different types of acquisitions. And that's where it becomes important, right? So historically at NASA, we've done almost everything in very traditional manner. There wasn't a very large commercial space industry 20 years ago. And other than commercial SATCOM, really not much of a commercial basis. So when you needed to develop something, NASA needed to do it itself primarily. We couldn't rely on the private sector 20 years ago to provide a lot of capability and services. So in that scenario, a traditional acquisition was more appropriate. And by traditional, I mean, you would primarily use a cost plus contract where you would pay the contractor for their costs, and then you would give them a little bit of profit. The government would absorb all the risk in that scenario. You'd have one prime contractor, they would have subs, NASA would be the only customer. We would own and operate the resultant hardware. We would have very, very detailed specifications, and we would pretty much pay for the entire development. And then on the other side, and this is where more of Clare's activity comes in, you have a capability that is already existing, and you can just buy it as a service. That's called commercial off the shelf. It's a very well understood sort of acquisition model. And then there's something in between where you don't necessarily have a capability, but you are not necessarily needing to go to a cost plus environment because you understand the technology. It's pretty well understood. You can estimate your costs pretty well. And there's a potential for other customers other than NASA. Didn't necessarily have that, or other than the federal government. Didn't necessarily have that before. So I think, and when you have that kind of situation, a public-private partnership kind of makes more sense. That's where you have usually a fixed price arrangement or acquisition strategy. Industry is the owner. You have government and non-government customers. Generally, NASA does not pay for the cost, but will pay for pre-negotiated milestones, a fixed price for them to demonstrate that they have achieved a certain amount of progress. And there's a cost share. The government doesn't pay for everything. So I thought it was important just to take a little bit of time to sort of establish those sort of definitions and ground rules. And so, as I said in the intro, we've had very good success with commercial cargo and commercial crew. And Ron, your question was, where are we looking to apply that in the future? And there's two primary areas where we're doing sort of public-private partnership development of capabilities. And one is commercial LEO destinations or commercial space stations. We know we are retiring the space station in 2030. That is our current policy. However, NASA has ongoing needs for research and technology development in low Earth orbit. We are going to need a 24/7, 365-day-a-year platform for us to continue to do research that will enable us to do our deep space exploration missions, Moon and Mars. And we need that platform to be relatively close and available and able to utilize that on a regular basis. But we don't need the entire footprint of the International Space Station. We want to be one of many customers. And what we found is that industry is interested and capable of providing this capability. They very much want to find other customers other than NASA. And so we are doing a public-private partnership to develop that capability now, in the hopes that it will be ready prior to ISS end of life in 2030. In fact, we want to have a little bit of overlap. The next area is in low Earth orbit communications. We have historically relied on the TDRS satellite system, the Tracking Data Relay satellite system that we developed in the 80s because, again, there wasn't a commercial capability to rely on, so NASA had to develop that capability itself. Most satellite communications goes from the ground up to a relay station and then back down. But the TDRS network allows a satellite which is in orbit to communicate with one of the TDRS satellites and then have that data bandwidth come back down to the Earth. And that's sort of a unique capability. And we are using public-private partnerships to develop a commercial service that we think will also benefit non-NASA customers, because we're not buying any more TDRS satellites. That's another thing that we plan to phase out. That is a very mature industry right now. We've found industry is very interested and capable of providing this capability, and for NASA, again, to be one of many customers. And what that does is it significantly reduces NASA's costs. And then we can use that savings for NASA to go to our deep space mission. So that's why we are really pushing for these things where NASA was the only customer and the primary developer, and now we want to really leverage the commercial capability that, as you said, Ron, has really emerged in the last 10 years, and in some cases dwarfs what we are spending on the government side, so that with that savings, we can then go farther, faster into the solar system.
Right. All right, Phil, thank you. Really compelling case, and I'm so glad that you brought up the point about the definition of commercial and clarifying that. That's a point that David and I actually spent some time on in the paper, because we do recognize that commercial can be used generically as any non-government organization, any company. But one of the aspects that we focused on relative to this definition of commercial was the way that it's characterized in the National Space Policy, where it specifically describes the activities, commercially based activities, where the company bears the majority of the investment and the risk associated with developing a particular solution or service. And that is quite in contrast to a legacy of the government investing in the development of bespoke systems, systems that are unique and uniquely built for the government, like the TDRS example that you gave. So it's really good clarification for the community writ large to have that distinction. So as we think about our way into the future, it'd be valuable to hear from both of you on what you see as the big drivers as we move into the future. You've talked about future plans, but drivers in terms of not only being able to leverage commercial, but to integrate them and to plan to acquire and integrate commercial capabilities into hybrid architectures. And so probably in the interest of the audience, we'll just give a brief definition there. Or a hybrid architecture is one where there are both government developed systems and commercial systems that are integrated together to serve the national mission needs. So Claire, if we can offer that topic to you and have you kick that around for us a little bit.
Sure thing, and I'll say I completely agree with Phil. Our experience in the commercial SATCOM office is, that the companies the government is not a market maker in the commercial sector. In most cases, our contracts are essentially, service level agreements, right? So we are not a we're a small portion of the business that we do with most of these companies. There are some exceptions. With Iridium, we are their largest single customer, and I think a major component of their revenue. But that is an exceptional situation. So I think that certainly plays into our ability to create alignments with commercial industry. But with respect to what's driving, I think, the need to pursue commercial in ways perhaps that there haven't been before are just the novel capabilities that are entering the marketplace. I know there's a lot of LEO mania going on right now with Starlink and OneWeb, but those developments are important, right? Because they're advancing the technology and the capabilities that are available to the U.S. And the various different applications and gaps that they're capable of filling and faster than the traditional systems, just given the length of time and planning it takes to get those in place. So I think that's a major factor, just the market itself, it taking off and our ability to leverage it in a way that's just very valuable for the money that we can spend, and also not having to build every single element of the end-to-end offering ourselves. We can just buy a service that includes terminals, that includes a ground segment that meets our needs. I think that obviously one of the hurdles is as Phil was describing, the companies are closing business cases based on their commercial business. But I think there are a lot of parallels between commercial customer needs and government needs, especially in the area of security. So I think we're seeing a lot more investment there, and companies paying attention to what the right baselines are, and an open-mindedness to work with the DoD on any additional enhancements. So I think that's very positive.
Excellent. Just a little bit of follow-up. So what's sort of the approach that the Space Force is taking to work the seams between the government systems and the commercial systems? You mentioned security. That's a good example where things have to be tightly integrated and essentially seamless, right, to avoid vulnerabilities.
Yeah, I think two things. Number one, I think it starts with education, right? For organizations that have been working with commercial industry for some time and in a broader capacity, I think they get the business models. We understand the technology very well. We understand the limiting factors in doing business with commercial. With organizations within the Space Force that have been solely focused on purpose-built systems, it is a bit of an enlightenment period, understanding that we do not own or operate the assets. We are buying a service. We're negotiating terms and conditions that ideally meet our all of our requirements, and that's just a shift. As I speak with different elements of the Space Force, there's some that also I think are coming from a false understanding that capability negotiated under separate contracts can be usurped and reallocated for some other purpose. And that's just not, generally speaking, how commercial business is set up. So it's some foundational differences that I think need to be better understood, number one. And then number two, for helping to facilitate an enterprise environment, it's automation. It's, as I described, we're leading the way in getting investments in systems to move data. But that needs to be, joint and collaborative. And I think there's a lot of good interest and energy there. It's just getting the mechanics put in place and moving toward that goal.
All right, Claire, thank you so much. And Phil, in terms of hybrid architectures, NASA is doing wonderful and amazing things relative to the plans for Artemis and getting astronauts back to the moon and safely home. One element of which, of course, is the nexus between a bespoke system, the Orion crew capsule, and a commercial service for the human lander system. So welcome your expanding a bit on the nature of the coordination and the kinds of things that the community should be aware of relative to bringing those hybrid architectures together?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ron. As you know, Orion was started about 12 years ago. We were in a very different world 12 years ago than we are today. There's a greater acceptance of these public-private partnerships and the commercial approach, and the commercial industry has gotten even stronger in that 12 years. So the acquisition strategy and really the program management strategy, of which the acquisition strategy is just a piece, they're very different, drastically different. Orion is more of the traditional development approach, and probably was appropriate back in 2010. We had not built a deep space capsule since Apollo. It's very difficult to estimate your costs when you're pushing the state of the art technologically. And when you can't estimate your costs, the private sector is very reluctant to enter into a fixed price contract because you could bankrupt the company. Today, we have a very different scenario. A lot of people want to go to the moon. There's a lot more companies that are seeing business potential, and particularly SpaceX, it is on their vision to go to Mars. And so you saw sort of a commonality of where the government wanted to go and where industry wanted to go, and not just SpaceX, there are others that want to do this. So you could leverage that interest, leverage the capabilities in the private sector, and do it more of a public-private partnership. The original HLS contract that went to SpaceX is fixed price. They are going to own and operate the resultant hardware, and can use that for other purposes. And NASA's role is more of a facilitator, but we will have requirements that we were going to have to validate, but hopefully a top-level set of requirements.
All right, thank you so much. And to your point, Phil, one of the things that we are recognizing is tremendous interest in the cislunar domain, and hearing and recognizing that there's over 60 companies who are investing and planning to develop and deploy capabilities in cislunar. So there's a tremendous opportunity set there as well for another show.
Yeah, Ron, if I could just touch on that, I am a little concerned. You would think all this commercial development, Claire and I would be, walking around with people slapping us on the back saying, congratulations, you're doing great. I am a little concerned that we are going to take this model and apply it to potentially areas that may not be appropriate. Cislunar, it's less clear to me what the business case is. It's less clear to me whether there's other customers. It's way more expensive to do cislunar than LEO. And as much as I am an advocate for the way we are doing commercial LEO destinations, the business case there is not obvious, right? We still have a lot of work to do to ensure that that business case closes and that those are sustainable commercial businesses. So we have to be really careful. I know fixed price development is very much in vogue at NASA and across the government now, and that's great. But fixed price development doesn't fix everything, if I can use that pun. If you're going to do fixed price development, your requirements must be mature and stable. If you are constantly changing your requirements, you might as well just have cost plus, because you're going to have to pay for every change request. The required technology has to be well understood so that the private sector can estimate their costs with a relatively high degree of fidelity. You really need to pick partners who understand the job. Otherwise, you're going to have significant performance issues, and that's going to be very difficult to resolve in a fixed price environment where, as you say, the private sector is taking on more of the risk. And then, in my opinion, you need to pick partners with an S, right? You need to have competition. If you don't, competition is so key, because if an issue pops up, and there are going to be issues, the government has almost no leverage when you have a single customer in a fixed price environment. And if you need that service, you are going to pay whatever it takes. So it is super important, not only for cost, but also for performance, to pick multiple providers when possible. That's another very big change from the way NASA had been doing things in the past. We usually just pick a prime contractor and just put all our eggs in that basket. Competition was something that we didn't really, in my opinion, fully appreciate. And today, I think we have a much better appreciation for that. And it is a key element when you're doing fixed price development. So I would say, to answer one of your previous questions, what are the barriers going forward? And Claire kind of touched on this a little bit. The barrier is really cultural. We have the authorities. The federal acquisition regulations have multiple kinds of acquisition strategies. And in the DoD and in NASA, we have other transactional authorities where you can enter into agreements outside the federal acquisition regulations. So we have broad, extensive, powerful acquisition tools and strategies at our disposal. It's more of a cultural thing. As I told you, NASA in the first 40, 50 years of our development, we did things one way. Right, so we were very comfortable with the cost plus model. All of our policies and procedures reflected that kind of development effort, and all of our senior management grew up in that kind of paradigm and were comfortable for that. So went comfortable with that. So when we got a new mission, I can tell you quite honestly, 15 years ago, we never even considered fixed price. It was just assumed that we were going to do cost plus. And I think on the DoD side, I don't want to speak for Claire. She could be much more articulate than I can, but when we get a new mission, we want to specify exactly what we wanted in mind-numbingly detailed set of requirements, and to get our stakeholders to say, hey, there's an existing capability that's off the shelf. It may only be 90% of what you want, but that's close enough. And you're going to save massive amounts of money just by doing fixed price and just by leveraging this capability instead of developing it all yourself. And I can tell you 15 years ago, even that argument would have fallen on deaf ears.
I would say that's spot on. Even within our office, obviously customers are coming to us because either MilSatCom, they don't have the priority given the scheme that's in place that the Joint Staff establishes, or the capabilities are more attractive. But nonetheless, the majority of the capability that we're procuring today is transponded capacity. The fastest growing capability is managed services, but the transponded capacity shows you that customers still have a perhaps maybe a bit of a trust issue, right? They still want to own and control, design the terminals, own and control the ground segment, own and separately control the network management of the traffic once it's ingested into their networks. So I think it is getting the DoD comfortable that these commercial solutions are reliable, can be depended upon to the same degree that previous solutions and capabilities have been. And I think that there's in some cases a bit of an iterative process there. With the Army, they're doing a SATCOM as a managed service pilot and expect to follow that with an enduring managed service contract. So I think that's very positive. And similarly, the Marine Corps, I think, intends to take on a similar approach. Other perhaps more smaller organizations or those at the tip of the spear, specific units, are jumping right in. But I do think that the barrier in many cases is largely cultural.
All right, Claire, definitely appreciate that, and appreciate that point about building confidence. It's one of the things that we wanted to address with the commercial readiness assessment framework, right? How do we think of the different elements of capabilities, market readiness, financial readiness, production, operational, all in the context of being confident in these acquisitions. So final question, what challenges do each of you have that you would like to present to the audience? You talk about training being very important and changing the culture, Phil. What would you like to offer to the audience to consider and be thinking about as the collective we make our way forward? The space enterprise makes its way forward.
So other than the cultural challenges that we have in the government and making sure that the government is trained in these other acquisition strategies and knows what those are, that's what I would say would be the big one to focus on for the government. But for the people in the private sector, what I would say would be to focus on would be to look for business opportunities. And in order to have business opportunities, your service or capability has to be cost effective. Historically, we just did not have a big incentive for our services, our space systems, to be cost effective. The government was the main customer. We are not as cost conscious as the private sector. And so we didn't see a lot of innovation because we didn't like change, and things were very, very expensive. And when you look for the federal government as your primary customer, again, you tailor that capability to the federal government. So what I've said for Commercial Crew is what we didn't want to have is the NASA equivalent of an aircraft carrier. Aircraft carrier is a great ship, but it is tailored to the Navy mission, and only the U.S. government can afford it. So I would say for my colleagues in the private sector space industry, focus on cost effectiveness, focus on getting costs down, and look for business opportunities, and then everybody wins. The government will buy your service because it's so much cheaper, and you can find other customers because you are looking for business opportunities. The industry grows, our capability grows, and everybody's happier. So that would be my challenge to the young people looking up. Look for a need, and then when you're developing your capability, just be hyper-focused on making sure that is cost-effective, so that you can get other customers and become really a commercial service that the government will buy as well.
Thank you, Phil. Claire, please.
Yeah, I think I would echo the cost effectiveness for sure. I think our customers need to understand that making the transition from their current approach to a new approach makes sense economically, and that they can scale, without having to assume a substantial amount of additional costs. So I think companies really need to get kind of creative and innovative about how they bring their innovation to market. It's one thing to educate, to find a need, and that's obviously essential, and to communicate, why your service is, desirable and distinct from competitors. But what's your business plan for selling it? And does that match up with the budgets that our customers have, and the challenges kind of built into that process? So I think that's critical, and as part of that, what are the terms and conditions, particularly as the department considers leasing terminals? If those are compromised or destroyed in conflicts, as a result of adversarial actions, etc. What are the terms for replacing those terminals or other elements of the end-to-end service? Because I think perhaps hidden costs could make what is seemingly an attractive new model become a bit cost prohibitive. So I think that's just an important nuance to focus on as well. And I think too, another key thing, and it's a bit of a common sense remark, just never assume that the audience you're dealing with has perhaps a higher level of understanding, based on their rank or previous experience. It's very important to introduce capabilities, and obviously, at the right level. Okay, otherwise, you think you'll end up wasting a lot of time, precious time, and engagements that you only get so often. I've just seen that mistake more often than I thought I would before stepping into this position.
All right, thank you, Claire. Yeah, that good communications is always valuable in all settings. All right. Well, thank you, Claire, Phil. Thank you so much for sharing your time, your experience, your insights with us today. Absolutely fantastic. And we look forward to continuing the grand adventures we're seeing across the country, and looking forward to a very bright and bold future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Right. Well, thank you for being here, everyone. Thank you to our guests. We had a nice little balanced conversation between defense space and civil space. I look forward to finding out more about how both parties kind of leverage and develop commercial endeavors in space even more. Don't forget to check out the paper that Ron co-authored with David McQuiggan, Assessing Commercial Solutions for Government Space Missions. And thank you to our technical director, James Liggins, our program coordinator, Jordan Bingham, Of course, you can always go to our website and watch or listen to all of our episodes, as well as check us out on Twitter at #TheSpacePolicyShow. Till next time, thanks.